Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name's Kaylee and these are my books. So today's video is a very shamefully late October wrap up. It is like almost the middle of November. I don't know what happened. Time just went so fast, you know? It should still be October. It feels like it's still October and yet we're in the middle of November. So here I am talking about my October read because apparently I'm bad at putting out videos when they should be going up. So we also have a bit of a dilemma because I read 40 books in October and I did not do a mid-month check-in like I normally do, which means I have not spoken about these 40 books and I just can't talk about 40 books in one video and give you all like actual reviews about each of these books while still telling you about the synopses for these books. So instead, I've decided to talk about my 10 favorite books that I read in October of the 40 books that I did read, because it just so happens that I gave out 10 5-stars in October. So what a satisfying number. I mean, the signs are there. I'm just supposed to talk about these 10 5-stars. So the books in this video are books that I read in October and gave a full 5 out of 5 stars to. A lot of them are spooky books because I read them in October, but not all of them are. I do have some sci-fi and fantasy books in here as well. So to start out, I did have 2 rereads in October. I almost said August. We are way past August. In October, I did reread 2 books and gave those books 5 stars again. First of which was Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. This, when I was in around 18, this was my favorite series of all time. I no longer consider it my favorite series of all time, but this just has a lot of nostalgia wrapped up in it. And I'm trying to do a very slow reread of the entire series. So basically, I've just been putting holds on the books for the audiobooks from the library. And when those holds come in, and they take many, many months each time, but when those holds come in, I'm listening to the books. So I listened to Throne of Glass in October, and loved it so much. 5 stars yet again. This is just such a nostalgic read for me. It's so cozy because I've reread this book so many times. Back when I first read this series, I think each time a new book in the series would come out, I would reread the whole series to get it fresh in my mind. So that means I've reread this book 1 quite a few times, but I just love it. I love it so much. If you don't know about Throne of Glass, I mean, where have you been? Because this is huge, but Throne of Glass is a YA fantasy series, and it kind of starts to lean new adult towards the later half, but the beginning books are definitely YA. And this is about the world's greatest, most notorious assassin, and she is in a horrific jail situation. She's in the mines, having to mine every day for the kingdom. And she gets chosen to be a champion in this trial situation for the king to choose a new assassin for the kingdom. So she is having to compete in these really brutal trials to win to be the king's assassin so that she doesn't have to go back to this horrific jail. And I find this series so much fun. It's hard for me to be able to tell you objectively if you would like it now, if you're a similar reader to me, because I don't even know if I would like it now if I picked it up for the first time. But I love it. I love it. And this is a series that just gets wider and wider with each book. So this first book starts out pretty small, pretty contained within the world. And then each new book adds more and more depth and details to the world. And I've been having so much fun with my reread. I actually already reread Crown of Midnight as well. And I'm waiting on a hold for Air of Fire. But Throne of Glass was the October read, and I gave it 5 stars yet again. My next reread was Starsight by Brandon Sanderson. This is book 2 in the Skyward series. I have not continued past book 2 prior to October, and I was really wanting to pick up book 3 in this series because I love this series. Like book 1 and book 2 both got 5 out of 5 stars. Obviously, even on reread, this got 5 out of 5 stars for me. I know a lot of people have some issues with the second book. I thought it was amazing. I thought it was so much fun. I loved seeing all of the different things that we are introduced to in this book come together. I'm being very vague since this is the second book in a series. But basically, this is Brandon Sanderson's YA science fiction series. And we follow Spensa, who is trying to become a pilot. This is book 1 synopsis. She is trying to become a pilot, but her father has been branded a coward, and so everyone in authority is trying to stop her from being a pilot, because in this society, being a coward is like the worst thing possible. But she is fighting against all odds and going through pilot training school because she wants to be able able to defend her people and her planet from these aliens that come and attack them from the stars every so often. So yes, on reread, book 2, still 5 out of 5 stars. Absolutely adored it. Now, along the same vein, I did pick up some of the novellas in this Skyward series. I actually read both Sunreach and Redawn. I did not read Evershore. This is a bind-up of the 3 novellas. I believe, well, I thought they all took place in between book 2 and book 3, and that's why I was trying to read these novellas before I picked up book 3. But then I found out that Evershore, I think you're supposed to read after book 3, so I haven't read Evershore yet. But I did read Sunreach and Redawn, and the 5-star that's in this video is Sunreach. I loved Sunreach. Oh my god. I did not know I was capable of being emotionally invested in yellow slugs, and yet I am incredibly emotionally invested in these yellow slugs. I love them. I care about them so much. So yes, Sunreach, it made me cry. I loved it. It was so wholesome and such a fun little novella. Like, I loved it just as much as Skyward and Starsight. And normally novellas in between series, Brandon Sanderson, he loves to write a novella in between his series. Normally I don't really care about them that much, but Sunreach I cared about so much. So if you're into the Skyward series, do not skip out on Sunreach. I gave Redawn 4 stars, so I still really liked it, but this video is about Sunreach because I loved Sunreach. It was incredible. I can't really give you a synopsis for that though, because that would spoil book 1 and book 2, and I already gave you the synopsis for book 1, Skyward, so we're just gonna stick with that. But if you're a fan of Skyward, try out the novellas for sure. They're incredible so far. Next up were 3 books that were all featured in the same vlog, so I'm going to talk about them all at the same time. And the sun is kind of going lower, so if you can see it shining weird on my face, I'm sorry, I'm filming at sunset right now. But they were actually all the books that I read for reading Lexi's favorites, Lexi from Books with Lexi. And I read The Last Housewife, The Last House on Needless Street, and The Night of the Mannequins, which is up on the screen somewhere here. And I gave all of them 5 out of 5 stars. They were all so incredible. So The Last Housewife is a really, really brutal, hard to read, dark story, emotional story about this woman who's kind of in a domestic abuse situation, and she listens on a podcast that her old friend runs, that her other old friend from college committed suicide, and she thinks this suicide is kind of fishy, so she calls up her friend that runs the podcast and basically says, hey, let's investigate this because I do not think this was a suicide. And this goes into some really dark, dark places, along with abusive sex cults and lots of sexism, horrific power dynamics. And there's a ton of trigger warnings in this book. They even list the trigger warnings within the book right here, content warnings. But I thought it was beautifully done. I thought the way that all of these horrific things were handled was done in a incredibly intelligent way. And this wall hard, wall heavy, I do not recommend it easily to people. If you are okay with the content warnings, I do recommend you pick this up because I thought it was an incredible book. It's not a story you're gonna pick up just for a fun, fast-paced thriller. This is a story you're gonna pick up because you want something heavy, but really, really well written and entertaining. Don't get me wrong, this is incredibly entertaining, but it's just, you know, it's not one of those silly thrillers. This packs a punch. No shade intended to silly thrillers though. I'm a big fan of silly thrillers. I just want you going into this The Last Housewife with the right mindset. Then The Last House on Needless Street is a very odd and quirky book following a couple different point of views, including a cat's point of view. And we have at the beginning of the book, a young girl in this town goes missing. Everyone thinks it's this one neighbor guy that does it, and so he kind of gets harassed by some of his neighbors. He becomes pretty reclusive. He's kind of a hermit, and he's a weird guy. He has a lot of quirks about him, and we're just following him go through his life along with a cat's point of view and the sister's point of view. The sister of the girl who went missing. This is a book that's going to feel kind of confusing, and you're going to be reading it and you're going to be like, what the heck is going on? But in the best way possible, because everything comes together at the end. I promise. It's all there at the end where you'll be like, whoa, that's genius. And you immediately want to reread the whole book. Like, I just finished this in October, obviously, and I'm already thinking about rereading it because I need to go back and see how some of these scenes were done after knowing what happens at the end. Like, it's so good. It's so good. And this is one of those books where it has a big twist, yet there's clues all throughout the book. And so if you don't see it coming, like I didn't see it coming, it's so pleasurable to then be able to go back through and see all the clues leading up to it, because apparently I'm dumb and I missed all of them. I missed all the clues. I even texted Lexi who loves this book, and I was like, I think I know what's going on. And then yeah, I had no idea what was going on. I should have kept my mouth shut. And then I also read Night of the Mannequins in the same vlog, gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Loved it. This is my first 5-star that I've given Stephen Graham Jones, but I consider Stephen Graham Jones one of my favorite horror authors because I've given so many of his books 4 and 4.5 stars. But I'm happy to say I finally have a full 5-star book from him. Night of the Mannequins is incredible. It's a psychological horror book. I don't even know if I said what genre this is. This is a horror. I'm sorry. This is a horror book. And then Night of the Mannequins is also horror. But Night of the Mannequins is a novella, and so it's very short, and it's so good. So this is a story about a group of kids, they're teenagers, and it starts out by saying that all of them end up dying, or most of them end up dying. I forget what the official line is, but you know going into it that a lot of deaths are going to happen. And the premise is one of them works at a movie theater, and they want to prank their friend who works at the movie theater by putting a mannequin in the movie theater. That way she thinks the ticket counts are off, and she gets in trouble with her boss for letting one of her friends in to see the movie for free, but really it's just a mannequin. But they're all sitting there. Then when they're waiting for the mannequin to be exposed, the mannequin gets up and walks out. And they're like, what just happened? And so I don't want you to think that this is a story about killer mannequins, though, because it's much more of a psychological horror story. So if you're just looking for a monster feature, this is not it. But this is a story where it's going to keep you guessing, and you're so ingrained into one person's point of view, one person's head, that you're kind of having to translate what's going on because you're being told it in such a biased perspective that you're then having to sift through the character's bias to really see the objective truth. And I found that so much fun in this story. Next up is a book I also read for a vlog this month, and that was Trying Out Middle Grade Horror, and I got a 5-star in Small Spaces. This book was so wholesome. It made me cry at the end. I loved seeing the friendships blossom. So this is a story about a bunch of middle schoolers. They're 12 years old, and one of them finds a book that an older lady is trying to get rid of in the river, and she takes the book out from the river because she's like, you shouldn't put books in the river, like we could donate those. And she starts reading the book, and it's very, very creepy about people disappearing on a farm like 100 years ago. And then her school goes on a field trip to that farm, and she's kind of realizing, wait a second, the stuff that's happening in this book is happening around me, and it's just about creepy farm and these kids trying to survive their field trip to a creepy farm. And as you can tell from the cover, there are scary scarecrows throughout this. Now, I found the atmosphere in this book really, really well done. The atmosphere was amazing, but ultimately what made me give this book 5 stars was the wholesome friendship moments. We see these kids that are really isolated, they don't have a lot of friends, they're really unhappy, form these character relationships throughout the story. That was just so satisfying for me to read about, and that's what made me cry at the end, was the development of the characters. So I highly recommend this if you're looking for middle grade horror, or even if you're interested in middle grade horror, check this book out. Next up is Kindred. Now this book is kind of a fusion of science fiction, horror, and historical fiction because there is time travel in it, but the time travel isn't a super sciencey time travel. It's just kind of a device to be able to allow this character to go back in time to this one specific moment, and she kind of exists both in current day and in this back in time moment. And then it's historical fiction, obviously, because we're very immersed in the historical fiction aspect when she goes back in time. And then it's horror because the things that she is experiencing in both timelines is horrific. It's really, really scary. Well, my phone just stopped recording, and of course I finished the video and then checked and realized it stopped recording. Yay! I love when this happens. But anyways, I was in the middle of telling you about Kindred when it stopped recording. I'm not sure where I left off, but I'm just gonna give you a synopsis now. So Dana is a woman, a black woman that lives in the 1970s, and she gets transported back in time to a pre-Civil War plantation that has slaves on it. And because she is a black woman, she is having to exist in this world of slavery, being a slave for this plantation. And so, of course, we get a lot of horrific details about slavery, a lot of horrific stuff about the plot just in general, with her transporting back and forth between the slavery timeline and the 1970s. We get some interesting parallels between these two timelines. There's a lot of commentary on interracial relationships and marriages, and there's a lot of commentary about what it means to have a family that is mixed, you know, white people and black people in your family, and how people can excuse a lot of behavior when it's family, when really, you know, racism in family is just as bad, if not worse, as racism from strangers. I thought this book was incredibly compelling. I finished it in one sitting. It was so fast-paced and so interesting. I had no idea where this plot was going the entire time, and it was horrific because the characters all felt like real people. It would have been so easy to make the characters in the slavery timeline just be horrifically evil monsters, right? Because they are committing horrifically evil acts. The acts of slavery are monstrous. And yet, these are humans. And Octavia Butler reminds us many times throughout this novel, these are humans. These are real people. These are not monsters. These are humans. And that just adds to the overall horror of this story, because we are seeing how humans can commit these acts of evil. I loved this book. Please don't ignore it, even if you don't like historical fiction, because again, I do not like historical fiction, and I loved this book. Next up is Confessions. Now, this is a very interesting book that kind of rides the line between thriller and horror, in my opinion, and this has a unique structure. So basically, the premise of the story is we follow a teacher who believes that some of the students in her class are guilty of murdering her daughter, and she punishes them. And this punishment then leads to a lot of ripple effects out in the school, and we are just seeing the punishment itself and then the ripple effects that the punishment has. The structure of the story is incredibly unique, in my opinion, because it's told in different parts, and each part is one person's point of view of what's going on. So we are often getting the same scene but told in different point of views. And it is not boring at all. It is not repetitive at all, because we are able to see the biases that these individual people have. And so while we're getting told the same scene multiple times, we're being told it through a different lens, a different viewpoint, a different bias. And then while we're adding up all of the different points of views, we're able to see potentially what objectively true thing is happening through all the bias of these different characters. I loved this story. I loved the structure. It was incredibly compelling. Just like Kindred, I read this in one sitting, and I highly recommend it. If you love a revenge thriller, that goes dark, pick up Confessions, because it will hit all of those boxes for you. And last but not least is The Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson. So this is a Carrie retelling, but instead about a girl getting her period and going crazy at prom, this is about a school that's set in 2014 that still has segregated proms. So there's a lot of racism at this school. And by the way, this is a real thing that was happening even in 2014. Tiffany D. Jackson writes about real life events, and there were rural schools in 2014 in America that were still having segregated proms. Really hard to believe depending on where you're from in America, but it is true, and that's part of why I love this book, because it opened my eyes up to the fact that this is freaking happening in 2014. It's crazy. So basically, we are following Maddie, who is white passing and has been white passing for most of her life until this book starts and she is outed as being black. Along with this outing is the first integrated prom, where white students and black students are all going to be at the same prom. And if you know Carrie, you know stuff goes down at prom. But even if you don't know Carrie, you know stuff happens at this prom, because we actually start the book with a podcast that tells us that hundreds of people die at this prom and that Maddie did it. So we have in this book a sense of dread, this sense that we know something horrific is happening at the end of this book, and we are just watching all the steps happen to get us to this horrific end. This book was incredible. I read it through audio, and I think the audiobook is one of the best audiobooks I've ever listened to. The production value is incredible because there are extra added audio effects throughout this book, but even while listening to it on 3x speed, I found that it added to my enjoyment. It did not annoy me at any moment. I think the extra added audio effects were incredibly well done. It was just enough to be interesting, but not enough to overwhelm you. And this book is one of my favorite books of October, and it's going to be one of my favorite books of the year. I highly recommend it. It is YA, but I recommend this to all readers, YA readers and adult readers. All of the characters had nuance. There were no caricatures in this book. They were all real characters that felt like real people that could exist in today's society. I loved all of the characters. Let me amend that, okay? I hated a lot of the characters, but I loved the way all of the characters were crafted, because I think Tiffany D. Jackson is great at crafting really interesting characters, really complex characters. But yes, loved this book. 5 out of 5 stars. You need to read it ASAP. So those are all of my 5-star reads in October. Let me know down in the comments what your 5-star reads in October were, and let me know if you've read any of the books I gave 5 stars to. And if you enjoyed this video, please give me a like and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you next time. Bye!